In a quiet world where magic was hidden from ordinary eyes, a baby with a lightning-shaped scar changed destiny forever. He was called the boy who lived, but he never knew why. Raised without love, unaware of the truth, Harry Potter's journey would take him from a tiny cupboard under the stairs to the grandest halls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and beyond. But this is no ordinary story. This is a tale of friendship and betrayal, of light and darkness, of a young boy who would face the greatest dark wizard of all time. Each year of his life at Hogwarts brought magic, wonder, and danger, and secrets far deeper than anyone could imagine. Tonight we will relive the entire Harry Potter saga, every spell, every mystery, and every battle, from the beginning to the very end. Settle in, close your eyes, and allow the world of magic to surround you as we embark on this journey together. A journey that will last through the night and remind us why Hogwarts will always feel like home. It was a night like no other. The sky over England was dark, heavy with clouds, and a cold wind whispered through the silent streets. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly, its wings gliding across the moonless sky. The world felt still, but unseen forces were already in motion. In a small, quiet village called Little Winging, something magical was about to happen, something that would change the course of history forever. At the edge of Privet Drive, a tall, thin man with long silver hair and half-moon spectacles appeared as if from nowhere. This was Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of his age, and his bright blue eyes were calm yet sorrowful. In his arms he carried a tiny baby, barely a year old. The child had soft black hair that curled against his forehead, but there was one thing that stood out, a lightning-shaped scar just above his right eyebrow. This was Harry Potter. He had no way of knowing, but only hours ago he had survived an attack from the darkest wizard who had ever lived, Lord Voldemort. His parents, James and Lily Potter, had died protecting him. And when Voldemort had turned his wand on the baby, something impossible had happened. The killing curse had rebounded. Voldemort had vanished, and Harry lived. Dumbledore looked down at the sleeping boy. "You will be famous," he whispered softly. "But tonight you must rest." He placed the baby at the doorstep of number 4 Privet Drive, a neat little house belonging to the Dursleys, Harry's only living relatives. A letter was tucked with him, explaining everything. Harry would grow up in a world with no magic, far away from the dangers that had claimed his parents. Life with the Dursleys was hard. Vernon and Petunia Dursley hated anything strange, and magic was the strangest thing of all. Harry spent his early childhood in a tiny cupboard under the stairs, treated more like a burden than a child. His cousin Dudley bullied him endlessly, and the Dursleys gave Harry just enough food, clothes, and attention to survive. Yet even in this colorless, ordinary world, strange things happened around Harry. Once, his hair grew back overnight after Petunia had tried to cut it short. Another time, he found himself on the roof of the school, escaping Dudley's gang without knowing how he had gotten there. Magic followed Harry, even when he didn't understand what it was. On Harry's 11th birthday, life changed forever. He received a letter thick made of parchment with emerald green ink. But before he could open it, Uncle Vernon snatched it away. Every day more letters came, sent by owls, slipping through the cracks in the door, appearing under the rug, even inside eggs from the milkman. Vernon panicked. He tried everything to stop the letters. He nailed the mailbox shut, boarded up the windows, and finally, in desperation, took the family to a tiny, isolated hut on a stormy island. At midnight, as the clock struck 12, the door shook violently. A massive figure stepped inside, towering and broad-shouldered, with wild hair and a thick beard. This was Rubeus Hagrid. He looked down at Harry with kind, twinkling eyes and handed him a squashed cake. "Happy birthday, Harry," he said warmly. "You're a wizard." Harry stared at him in disbelief. A wizard? It sounded impossible, but Hagrid explained everything. Harry's parents had been magical, and so was he. He had been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a place where he would learn to master his abilities. For the first time in his life, Harry felt hope. The next day, Hagrid led Harry through the heart of London to a hidden street called Diagon Alley with a tap of his pink umbrella. A brick wall opened like a doorway, revealing a bustling magical market. Harry's eyes widened as he stepped inside. Shops sold flying broomsticks, glittering cauldrons, shimmering robes, and sweets that changed colors as you ate them. Owls hooted softly from cages, and goblins with sharp features guarded the great marble bank, Gringotts. For the first time in his life, Harry felt like he belonged. But everywhere he went, whispers followed him. People pointed and smiled, and sometimes gasped when they saw him. "It's him," they whispered. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Harry was embarrassed, even confused by the attention. He didn't feel like a hero. But Hagrid explained the truth. Voldemort's curse had left Harry with his scar and destroyed the Dark Lord's power. That was why the wizarding world celebrated his name. With his school supplies packed and his new wand in hand, Harry boarded the Hogwarts Express, the scarlet train that would take him to a new life. As the train moved through the countryside, Harry met Ron Weasley, a freckled boy with bright red hair and a big, warm smile. They shared sweets from the trolley and laughed like they had known each other forever. Later, a clever, bushy-haired girl named Hermione Granger appeared at their door, offering to fix Ron's broken wand spell. She was brilliant and bossy, but Harry liked her immediately. By the time the train reached its destination, Harry felt like he had already made friends for life. That night he saw Hogwarts Castle for the first time. Its tall towers glowed in the moonlight, reflecting on the black lake below. Harry's heart swelled with excitement and nervousness as the students entered the great hall. Hundreds of floating candles lit the vast space, and 4 long tables filled with students watched silently. At the front of the room stood an ancient magical hat, the Sorting Hat. One by one, students placed it on their heads, and it called out the name of their house. When it was Harry's turn, the Sorting Hat spoke softly in his mind. "You could be great in Slytherin," it whispered. "You have courage and ambition." But Harry shook his head. "Not Slytherin," he begged. The hat paused, then finally shouted, "Gryffindor." Cheers erupted from the Gryffindor table. Harry smiled shyly as he joined his new housemates, sitting beside Ron and Hermione. For the first time in his life, he felt at home. At Hogwarts, Harry discovered a world beyond his imagination. Moving staircases led to hidden passages, portraits talked and gossiped, and feasts appeared magically on the long tables. Harry loved his classes, especially flying lessons with Madame Hoche, where he proved himself a natural on a broomstick. But Hogwarts was not without its mysteries. One night, Harry, Ron, and Hermione stumbled upon a room guarded by a 3-headed dog, gigantic and terrifying. Something important was hidden there, something the teachers didn't want students to find. And soon Harry realized that someone was trying to steal it. Harry's first days at Hogwarts felt like a dream. He would wake up in the Gryffindor Tower, sunlight spilling through the high-arched windows, with the sound of owls hooting faintly from the owlery. The castle was alive in ways Harry had never imagined. Staircases that changed direction without warning, corridors filled with secret doors, and portraits that moved and spoke as though they had lives of their own. Classes were as fascinating as they were challenging. In Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, Harry learned how to turn matches into needles. Though his attempts often left the match half transformed and smoking at the ends, Charms class with Professor Flitwick was lighthearted. The tiny professor had to stand on a stack of books just to see over his desk. Harry, Ron, and Hermione would practice levitating feathers, whispering, "Wingardium Leviosa," again and again until the delicate white plumes finally floated above the desks. But not all classes were enjoyable. Potions class with Professor Snape was cold and unforgiving. Snape's long black robes trailed behind him as he stalked through the dungeon classroom, his dark eyes always lingering on Harry with a strange, almost cruel intensity. He asked questions Harry could not answer, cutting him down with sharp remarks when he hesitated. Harry could not understand why Snape seemed to despise him so much. Life at Hogwarts was not just about classes. There were Quidditch matches to watch, a sport played on broomsticks high above the ground. Harry was astonished when Professor McGonagall, after seeing him skillfully catch a falling Remembrall during flying lessons, told him he would be the youngest Seeker on the Gryffindor team in a century. The idea of playing in front of the entire school made his heart pound with both excitement and nerves. Though the days were filled with wonder, mysteries were brewing in the shadows. Harry could not forget the enormous three-headed dog they had seen on the Forbidden's third-floor corridor. Each of its 3 mouths had snapped at them with razor-sharp teeth, and the creature was guarding something important. Hermione, ever the curious one, had gone to the library to research what might be hidden beneath the trapdoor the beast was protecting. One evening, after a long day of classes, Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat by the crackling fireplace in the Gryffindor common room. The warm glow lit their thoughtful faces as they whispered about the mystery. "It's obvious," Hermione said, her voice low. "That dog is guarding something, and whatever it is, Dumbledore doesn't want anyone to get it. But who would want to steal it?" Ron asked, frowning. Harry's thoughts drifted to the dark, hooked nose and piercing eyes of Professor Snape. He remembered the way Snape had looked at him during potions, as though he could see straight through him. Something about Snape felt dangerous, but Harry had no proof. Weeks passed and autumn settled over Hogwarts. The trees around the Black Lake turned shades of deep red and gold, and the air grew crisp and cool. The first Quidditch match of the season was approaching, and Harry spent hours on the practice field, learning how to dive and dodge while keeping his eyes on the elusive golden snitch. Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, was a patient but firm teacher. "You're a natural," he told Harry, but that did little to calm the boy's nerves. The morning of the match dawned bright and clear. The entire school gathered in the stadium, their cheers echoing across the grounds. Harry mounted his Nimbus 2000 broomstick, gripping it tightly as Madame Hooch's whistle blew. The game was fast and chaotic. Bludgers zoomed dangerously close, and the quaffle soared from hand to hand. Harry searched the sky for the snitch, his heart pounding in his ears. Then suddenly something felt wrong. His broom jerked violently beneath him, almost throwing him off. Harry clung on, his knuckles white as the broom bucked and twisted in midair. He could hear shouts from below, but the wind roared too loudly in his ears. Somewhere in the stands, Hermione's sharp eyes spotted Snape, his lips moving as though muttering a spell. "Ron, look!" Hermione gasped. She didn't hesitate. She darted through the crowd, climbed over the benches, and set fire to Snape's robes with a whispered "Lacarnum inflammare." Snape yelped and stumbled, breaking his concentration. At that exact moment, Harry's broom steadied. He leaned forward, spotted the glint of gold, and dove with all his strength. His hand closed around the snitch just inches from the ground, and the crowd erupted in deafening cheers. Harry barely had time to catch his breath before Hermione and Ron pulled him aside, their faces pale. "Your broom was jinxed," Hermione said breathlessly. "I'm sure of it." "Snape was cursing it, trying to knock you off." Harry's stomach twisted. "But why? Why would he want to hurt me?" As the days grew colder and the castle halls filled with festive decorations for Christmas, the mystery deepened. Harry's curiosity drew him back to the third-floor corridor one snowy evening, and this time they discovered a name, Nicholas Flamel. "It has to be connected," Hermione said one night in the library, her finger tracing the words in an old book. Flammel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. It can turn any metal into gold and produces the elixir of life, which makes the drinker immortal. Harry and Ron exchanged wide-eyed looks. If the stone was what the dog was guarding, it was no wonder someone wanted to steal it. Immortality and endless wealth were prizes worth killing for. The Christmas holidays arrived, and most students returned home. Harry stayed at Hogwarts, and for the first time, he experienced the warmth of a real holiday. The common room glowed with the light of the decorated tree, and the scent of warm treacle tarts filled the air. On Christmas morning, he awoke to a pile of presents at the foot of his bed, something the Dursleys had never given him. Among the gifts was a mysterious package containing an invisibility cloak, smooth and silvery, able to render its wearer completely unseen. The note attached read simply, "Use it well." That night, Harry could not resist the temptation. He draped the cloak over his shoulders and wandered the castle's quiet halls, slipping unseen past teachers and prefects. Deep in the restricted section of the library, he searched for answers about the Philosopher's Stone, but as he tiptoed among the towering shelves, a sudden noise made him freeze. A piercing scream erupted from one of the books, and Harry fled, the echo chasing him down the corridor. He stumbled into an empty classroom to hide and found himself standing before a tall, ornate mirror. Its surface shimmered with magic, and when Harry stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. Staring back at him was his reflection, but he was not alone. Behind him stood a man and woman with gentle smiles, their arms wrapped around him. Harry pressed his hands to the glass, his heart aching with a longing he could not put into words. For the first time, he was seeing his parents. He returned to the mirror night after night, desperate to hold on to the fleeting sense of family it gave him. But on the third night, Dumbledore appeared silently behind him. "This mirror shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts," Dumbledore said softly. "But it does not show the truth. It is dangerous to dwell on dreams, Harry." Harry nodded, though he could not tear his eyes away from the mirror. Dumbledore placed a hand on his shoulder. "The mirror will be moved tonight. You must promise me you will not go looking for it." Harry promised, though the emptiness in his chest felt heavier than ever. The days after Christmas moved slowly, and winter settled over Hogwarts like a thick, silent blanket. The castle's high stone walls were frosted with ice, and the lake was frozen solid, glistening like black glass under the pale moonlight. Harry, Ron, and Hermione spent hours in the library, wrapped in scarves and cloaks, trying to piece together the final details about the Philosopher's Stone. Every clue they found made their hearts beat faster, because one thing was becoming painfully clear: someone was after the stone, and they were running out of time. Harry couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that danger was closer than ever. At night he would lie awake in the Gryffindor Tower, the fire in the common room reduced to glowing embers, listening to the castle creak and shift in the wind. Images of Snape filled his mind as cold eyes, his muttered curses during the Quidditch match, the way he seemed to appear wherever Harry went. One evening, after yet another fruitless search through the library's restricted section, the trio sat in the shadowy common room. "We have to do something," Hermione whispered, glancing nervously around to make sure they were alone. "The stone can give immortality. If Voldemort gets it—" She didn't finish the sentence, but they all felt the chill of her words. Harry clenched his fists. "We can't just wait. Snape's going to take it any day now." "I know it." Ron's ears reddened as he thought. "Then we go through the trapdoor, tonight. Before he gets the chance." The decision weighed heavily on them, but they all knew it was the only way. That night, when the castle was silent and the moonlight pooled like silver on the stone floors, Harry, Ron, and Hermione slipped out from the Gryffindor common room under the cover of the invisibility cloak. Their footsteps echoed softly as they crept through the corridors, hearts hammering in their chests. When they reached the third-floor corridor, the enormous three-headed dog was waiting, its 3 sets of yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. Its growls rumbled through the floor like distant thunder. But Hermione was ready. She produced a flute, a simple wooden instrument, and began to play a soft, trembling tune. The effect was immediate. The beast's snarls softened into low whimpers, and its massive head slowly sank to the ground, one by one. Harry stepped forward, heart pounding as he pulled open the trapdoor beneath the dog's paws. The gaping blackness below seemed endless. "I'll go first," Harry whispered. He gripped the edge and dropped. For a breathless moment he fell through darkness, then landed with a crash on something soft and springy. But relief turned to panic as the vines beneath him began to curl and tighten around his legs. "It's got me," he gasped, struggling as the plant coiled tighter. "Devil's snare," Hermione's voice called from above. She leapt down beside him, her wand ready. "Don't struggle, Harry, it makes it worse." Harry tried to stay still, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts as the vines squeezed. Hermione waved her wand. "Lumo solum," she cried. A brilliant light burst from the tip, and the devil's snare recoiled, slithering away like a wounded snake. Harry collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping for air. When Ron joined them, the 3 hurried down the passage and entered another chamber. Here, hundreds of shimmering winged keys darted through the air, glinting in the dim torchlight like a swarm of jeweled insects. At the far end of the room stood a locked door, its key among the frantic flock. Harry mounted a broomstick, his heart racing as he soared into the air. The keys sliced past his ears like tiny blades, but he had spotted the one they needed, a silver key with a bent wing. Diving sharply, Harry stretched out his hand, fingers closing around the struggling key. He returned to the ground and jammed it into the lock, the door swinging open with a groan. They stepped into the next chamber and froze. A giant chessboard sprawled before them, the pieces as tall as men, carved from gleaming black and white stone. The air was thick with magic, and the pieces turned their heads to look at the intruders. Ron's face was pale, but his eyes were set with determination. "We'll have to play our way across," he said. "I'll be the knight." The game was brutal. Each move was life-sized, and when a piece was captured, it shattered into stone fragments. Ron directed their movements with surprising skill, shouting instructions while dodging attacks from the towering opponents. But the final move was his sacrifice. "I have to be taken," he said, gripping the reins of his knight's horse. "No," Harry and Hermione said at once, but Ron shook his head. "It's the only way. Once I'm out, you two can checkmate the king." "Do it. Don't argue." The Black Queen bore down on him, her sword raised, and the sound of the impact echoed through the chamber as Ron was struck and crumpled to the ground. Harry's chest ached as he stepped forward and took the king's place, checkmating him with a final decisive move. The Black King bowed and toppled, the board freezing into silence. Harry and Hermione rushed to Ron's side, relieved to find him breathing. "Go on," Ron whispered, his voice weak. "You have to stop Snape." The next room was smaller, lined with potion bottles and a riddle written on a scroll. Hermione's sharp mind solved the puzzle quickly, identifying the small vial that would allow one of them to pass through the magical fire blocking the final door. "You go, Harry," Hermione said firmly. "I'll go back and help Ron. Be careful." Harry stepped through the wall of flames and found himself in a quiet chamber. It was empty except for a tall mirror, the same mirror he had seen on Christmas night. He walked slowly toward it, his reflection gazing back with wide, fearful eyes. But he was not alone. A voice came from the shadows, soft and trembling. "I knew you'd come." Harry spun around. Professor Quirrell stepped into the light, his hands twitching at his sides. The timid stutter was gone from his voice, replaced by a chilling calm. "Snape was never after the stone," Quirrell said softly. "It was me all along." Harry's blood ran cold. Quirrell's eyes glittered as he stepped closer. "Do you see this mirror? It will show me where the stone is hidden. But I cannot figure out how to take it." The voice that followed was high and cold, seeming to come from nowhere. "Use the boy," it whispered. Quirrell froze, then turned to Harry with a strange, expectant look. "Come here," he commanded. "Look into the mirror." Harry stepped forward, his heart hammering. He gazed into the glass and saw himself slipping a small, red stone into his pocket. And to his shock, he felt a weight drop into his real pocket. The Philosopher's Stone. Quirrell's eyes narrowed. "What did you see?" Harry shook his head. I saw myself shaking hands with Dumbledore." The cold voice hissed, furious. "He lies. Let me speak to him." Quirrell reached up and unwound his turban. Harry gasped as the cloth fell away, revealing a pale, skeletal face on the back of Quirrell's head. Red eyes gleamed like burning coals, and a lipless mouth curved into a cruel smile. "Harry Potter," the voice whispered, "see what I have become. Mere shadow and vapor. But there is no good and evil, only power, and those too weak to seek it. Give me the stone." Harry backed away, clutching his pocket. "No," he said, his voice trembling. "Seize him." Voldemort shrieked. Quirrell lunged, his hands closing around Harry's throat. But the moment his skin touched Harry's, Quirrell screamed. His flesh blistered and burned as though Harry's very presence was poison. Harry pressed forward, his hands against Quirrell's face, and the man's body began to crumble to ash. Voldemort's piercing scream filled the chamber as a black shadow ripped free and soared away, vanishing into the night. Harry's vision swam. He felt the stone heavy in his pocket, then darkness claimed him. When he woke, he was in the hospital wing. Dumbledore sat beside him, his blue eyes warm and full of relief. "You were very brave," the headmaster said softly. "The stone is safe. Nicholas Flamel has agreed to destroy it." Harry asked about Voldemort, his voice small. Dumbledore sighed. "He is still out there, Harry, but because you stood up to him, he is weaker than he has ever been. That too is a victory." Harry lay back against the pillows, the weight of everything settling on him. He thought of his parents, of the stone, of the friends waiting to see him. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly be a part of this world. The school year ended with Gryffindor winning the House Cup, thanks to the bravery of Harry, Ron, Hermione, and even Neville, who had stood up to his friends when it mattered most. The cheers in the Great Hall were deafening as the scarlet and gold banners unfurled, celebrating their victory. As the Hogwarts Express carried him back to the Dursleys for the summer, Harry sat by the window, the wind whipping through his untidy hair. He had a home now, a place where he belonged, friends who cared for him, and the knowledge that even in the darkest of times there was light. And this was only the beginning. Summer at the Dursleys' house was always unbearable, but this time it was different. Harry had something to look forward to. Ron had invited him to the Quidditch World Cup, and Harry could hardly believe his luck. When the Weasleys arrived to collect him, the house was filled with the usual chaos. Fred and George accidentally dropped Tung-Tung toffees. Dudley's tongue grew several feet long, and Uncle Vernon's rage nearly boiled over. But eventually Harry was free. He traveled with the Weasleys using the portkey, a battered old boot lying in the middle of a misty hill. The moment Harry touched it, a sharp tug pulled at his navel, and he was whisked away, spinning through the air, landing hard on soft grass. They had arrived at the site of the Quidditch World Cup. The campsite was like a festival. Tents of every color and shape dotting the fields, enchanted flags waving proudly. Wizards from all over the world had gathered, wearing their country's colors and cheering loudly. Harry's eyes widened at the sighthouse elves darting about serving food. foreign wizards wearing exotic robes and broomsticks that made his Nimbus 2000 look like a toy. That night, they entered the stadium and Harry felt his breath catch. It was vast, big enough to hold 100,000 spectators, its golden seats rising high into the night sky. The match between Ireland and Bulgaria was fierce and fast-paced. Viktor Krum, Bulgaria's seeker, flew with such skill it was mesmerizing, though Ireland ultimately won. But the celebration didn't last. That night, masked wizards attacked the campsite, setting tents ablaze and sending curses flying. Harry, Ron, and Hermione fled into the forest as chaos erupted around them. Then, high in the sky, green light burst forth, forming the shape of a skull with a serpent's tongue. It was the Dark Mark, Voldemort's symbol. The wizarding world was shaken. Even at Hogwarts, the mood was tense when the students returned for the new school year. But Dumbledore had a surprise. Hogwarts would host the Triwizard Tournament, a legendary magical competition between 3 wizarding schools. Boxbatons from France and Durmstrang from Eastern Europe would arrive, each sending a champion to compete. When the visitors arrived, Hogwarts was abuzz with excitement. Boxbaton students, led by Madame Maxime, swept in gracefully, their powder blue uniforms shimmering. Durmstrang students, with their fur-lined cloaks and grim expressions, were led by the imposing Professor Karkaroff, and among them was none other than Viktor Krum. The champions would be chosen by the Goblet of Fire, a magical cup that would select one student from each school. No one under 17 could enter. The goblet's magical age line ensured it. Names flew in, and the entire school held its breath. On Halloween night, the goblet spat out its choices: Viktor Krum for Durmstrang, Fleur Delacour for Boxbatons, and Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts. But then, in an impossible twist, a 4th name appeared: Harry Potter. The hall erupted in confusion and whispers. Harry was stunned he hadn't entered his name, and he was too young to compete. But the goblet's decision was binding. He was now a champion. Many students turned against him, believing he had cheated to gain glory. Ron, feeling left out and jealous, stopped speaking to Harry. The loneliness was crushing. Hagrid gave Harry a hint about the first task: dragons. Harry's heart nearly stopped when he saw the massive creatures, fire streaming from their nostrils. He would have to steal a golden egg from one of them. On the day of the task, the stadium was filled with roaring spectators. Harry's dragon was a Hungarian horntail, the most dangerous of all. With trembling hands, Harry summoned his broomstick. He darted through the air, fire licking at his heels as the dragon snapped and roared. But with clever maneuvers, he seized the egg and escaped, his heart pounding in triumph. Ron and Harry finally reconciled, and the tension lifted. The egg held a clue to the second task, but its shrieking sound was impossible to decipher until Cedric told Harry to listen to it underwater. When he did, he heard voices singing, "Come seek us where our voices sound. We've taken what you'll sorely miss." The second task was in the icy depths of the Hogwarts lake. Harry dove into the freezing water, aided by gillyweed that gave him gills and webbed feet. He swam past schools of fish and eerie shadows until he reached a group of hostages bound underwater. Among them was Ron. Harry was meant to take only one hostage, but he couldn't leave the others. He freed Ron and the other captives, barely escaping as the gillyweed's effects wore off. Though he finished last, the judges awarded him high marks for moral courage. The final task approached. The champions would navigate a vast maze filled with dangerous magical creatures and spells, racing to the Triwizard Cup at its center. But the maze was full of more than obstacles. Dark magic was at work. Harry and Cedric reached the cup together, deciding to touch it at the same time. But the moment their fingers brushed the handle, they were yanked away by a portkey. They landed in a graveyard. Cedric looked around, confused, but Harry felt a chill seep into his bones. A hooded figure emerged, and a voice cold as ice gave the command. Kill the spare. A flash of green light, and Cedric crumpled lifelessly to the ground. Harry's scream tore through the night as Wormtail, Voldemort's servant, tied him to a gravestone. Harry watched in horror as Wormtail performed a ritual bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. Voldemort's form rose from the cauldron, tall and skeletal, his red eyes gleaming with hatred. "Harry Potter," Voldemort whispered, "we meet again." He summoned his Death Eaters, those masked and cloaked followers who had escaped justice. They bowed before him, trembling. Voldemort taunted them, then turned to Harry. "Now we duel," he hissed. Harry raised his wand, his heart hammering. Voldemort's curse met his own spell in midair, and the wands locked in a beam of golden light. Shadows burst from Voldemort's wand, the spirits of Cedric, Harry's parents, and others Voldemort had killed. They surrounded Harry, shielding him, urging him to run. Harry broke the connection, grabbed Cedric's body, and touched the cup. The portkey pulled him back to Hogwarts, where the crowd erupted in cheers until they saw Cedric's body. Harry fell to the ground, sobbing as the weight of what had happened crashed over him. Voldemort had returned. Dumbledore moved swiftly, sending Harry to the hospital wing and summoning allies, but the Ministry refused to believe Voldemort was back. The world was about to change, and Harry knew darker times lay ahead. The summer following Voldemort's return was one of the darkest and most suffocating periods Harry had ever endured. Back at Privet Drive, he was once again trapped with the Dursleys, who had no idea of the storm brewing in the wizarding world. He had no letters from Ron or Hermione that explained what was happening, only short, frustratingly vague notes that gave him no comfort. Harry was angry. Angry at being left out, angry at Dumbledore for keeping him in the dark, and furious at the fact that the rest of the world seemed to be pretending nothing had changed. He spent his days pacing the small bedroom, straining to hear any news on the Muggle television about strange happenings that might indicate Voldemort's activity. One sweltering night, Harry and Dudley were ambushed by Dementors in a deserted alleyway. The icy cold swept over Harry, and he heard once again the distant screams of his mother as Voldemort killed her. He barely managed to summon his Patronus, saving both himself and Dudley. The Dementors' appearance confirmed Harry's worst fear. Voldemort's followers were active again. The Ministry's reaction was swift and cruel. Harry was accused of using underage magic and summoned for a full hearing before the Wizengamot. He was terrified expulsion from Hogwarts loomed over him. But Dumbledore arrived at the hearing, calm and commanding, and with the help of witness testimonies, including Mrs. Figg, Harry's eccentric neighbor who turned out to be a squib, Harry was cleared of all charges. After the trial, Harry was whisked away to a secret location, number 12, Grimmauld Place, the ancestral home of Sirius Black. It was also the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, a secret organization led by Dumbledore, fighting Voldemort in the shadows. Harry was finally reunited with Ron, Hermione, and the Weasleys, but the joy was bittersweet. He was frustrated at how little he was being told, feeling more isolated than ever. Life at Grimmauld Place was tense. The house was gloomy and hostile, with ancient black family relics that seemed to sneer at the Order's presence. Sirius was delighted to have Harry there, but Harry sensed his godfather was restless, longing for the freedom the Order's work denied him. When Harry returned to Hogwarts for the new school year, he was shocked to find that the Ministry had appointed a new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Dolores Umbridge. She was a short, toad-like woman with a syrupy sweet voice that made Harry's skin crawl. It quickly became clear that she was there to exert the Ministry's control over the school. Umbridge's lessons were useless. She refused to teach practical defensive magic. Her detentions were cruel. She made Harry write lines using a quill that carved the words into his hand, the words scarring his skin in blood. Harry's anger simmered, but he wasn't alone. Many students were equally frustrated. Hermione had an idea. They would form a secret group to learn real defensive magic. They named it Dumbledore's Army, or the DA, and met secretly in the Room of Requirement, a hidden chamber that appeared when they needed it. Harry became their teacher, and for the first time all year, he felt a sense of purpose. But Harry's connection to Voldemort was growing stronger. He began to have dreams that felt real, visions from Voldemort's perspective. One night, he dreamed of a snake attacking Mr. Weasley in the Department of Mysteries. Panicked, Harry told Dumbledore, and Mr. Weasley was saved. Dumbledore, however, began avoiding Harry, a painful distance that only deepened Harry's anger. He was instead sent to take occlumency lessons with Snape, learning to shield his mind from Voldemort's intrusions. The lessons were humiliating, and Harry's resentment toward Snape only grew. Umbridge's control over the school tightened. She became Hogwarts High Inquisitor, firing teachers and inspecting classes. When she discovered the day, Dumbledore took the blame and fled the school, leaving Umbridge as headmistress. Hogwarts fell under her iron rule, but Harry and his friends continued to resist. The visions returned, and one in particular chilled Harry's blood: Voldemort torturing Sirius at the Department of Mysteries. Desperate to save his godfather, Harry gathered his closest friends Ron, Hermione, Neville, Luna, and Ginny. They flew to London on thestrals, skeletal horse-like creatures only visible to those who had seen death. The Department of Mysteries was a labyrinth of strange, magical rooms. At its center was a glass sphere containing a prophecy, one that bore Harry's name. But before they could escape with it, they were ambushed by Death Eaters. A fierce battle erupted. Spells ricocheted through the dark corridors as the young wizards fought bravely against Voldemort's followers. Harry watched in horror as the prophecy shattered, lost forever. Just when it seemed they would be overwhelmed, the Order of the Phoenix arrived. Sirius fought with ferocity, protecting Harry at every turn. But then, in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, Bellatrix Lestrange struck Sirius with a curse, and he fell through the veil in the Death Chamber, a mysterious archway that separated the living from the dead. Harry screamed, sprinting toward the veil, but Remus Lupin held him back. Sirius was gone. Grief and fury consumed Harry as he chased Bellatrix into the atrium. Voldemort himself appeared, his red eyes glinting with malice. Harry stood frozen in terror, but then Dumbledore arrived, engaging Voldemort in a duel of unimaginable power. Spells clashed like thunder, statues came alive, and the very air vibrated with magic. Voldemort fled, but not before the Ministry officials witnessed his return with their own eyes. There was no denying it now. The wizarding world could no longer pretend Voldemort was gone. Back at Hogwarts, Harry was hollow with grief. The loss of Sirius was a wound deeper than any curse. Dumbledore finally sat with him, explaining the truth Harry had long feared. The prophecy had said that either Harry or Voldemort must die at the hands of the other. Harry felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. He was the one who would have to face Voldemort in the end. As the school year ended, Harry looked out over the grounds of Hogwarts. He knew the darkest days lay ahead, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Ron, Hermione, and the others were with him, and together they would face whatever was coming. The wizarding world was no longer in denial. Voldemort had returned, and the darkness was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Death Eaters were attacking openly, now families were being torn apart, people were disappearing, and fear gripped even the bravest hearts. Harry spent most of the summer at the Burrow with the Weasleys, yet even there, the atmosphere was heavy. There were moments of laughter, but they were fleeting, always overshadowed by the war outside. Harry couldn't stop thinking about Sirius. The grief was a constant ache, like a wound that refused to heal. One warm evening, Harry was visited by Dumbledore. The headmaster's eyes looked older, more tired, but his presence still carried a quiet strength. "Harry, there is much we must discuss," Dumbledore said. He explained that the coming year would be different. Harry would be taking private lessons with him, lessons that would prepare him for what was coming. They left Privet Drive together, stopping briefly to collect Horace Slughorn, a former potions master who had been in hiding since Voldemort's return. Slughorn was rotund and fond of luxury, but his knowledge was valuable, and Dumbledore convinced him to return to teach at Hogwarts. When Harry finally boarded the train back to school, the journey felt strange. Hogwarts no longer seemed untouched by the world's dangers. Auras guarded the castle, and rumors of attacks filled the air. The warmth Harry had once felt when stepping into the Great Hall was replaced by an unsettling awareness that nowhere was truly safe anymore. Classes resumed, and to Harry's surprise, Slughorn became his potions teacher. During their first lesson, Harry discovered an old, battered textbook filled with handwritten notes and spells, far more effective than the standard instructions. The book was marked, "This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince." The prince's notes gave Harry an unexpected advantage. He began excelling in potions, winning Slughorn's favor and even earning a vial of Felix Felicis liquid luck. But Hermione was deeply suspicious, warning Harry that using unknown spells could be dangerous. Meanwhile, Harry's mind was occupied with something far more troubling: Draco Malfoy. Harry was convinced Draco was up to something sinister. He had seen him acting secretive, sneaking around the castle, and Harry was sure Draco was working for Voldemort. The private lessons with Dumbledore became the anchor of Harry's year. Dumbledore used the pensieve to show Harry memories from Voldemort's past, his time at the orphanage, his arrival at Hogwarts, his obsession with powerful magical artifacts. It was in one of these memories that Harry learned of Horcruxes, dark objects in which a wizard could hide a piece of their soul. Voldemort had split his soul into multiple Horcruxes, making himself nearly immortal. Destroying them all was the only way to truly kill him. One night, Dumbledore revealed they had found the location of a Horcrux. They would retrieve it together. The journey took them far from Hogwarts to a desolate seaside cave. The entrance was hidden behind jagged rocks and crashing waves, and the air was cold with the weight of ancient magic. Inside, the walls were slick with dampness, and the sound of distant water echoed like a whisper. In the center of a black underground lake stood a stone basin filled with a glowing potion. The Horcrux locket rested at the bottom, but the potion could not simply be removed. It had to be drunk, Dumbledore volunteered. As Harry held the goblet to his lips, Dumbledore's body shook violently. He began to cry out, begging Harry to stop. "Please, make it stop. Kill me." Tears burned in Harry's eyes as he forced his mentor to drink the potion. When it was done, Dumbledore was so weak he could barely stand. As Harry tried to help him back across the lake, the water erupted. In fury, pale, rotting corpses animated by dark magic swarmed out of the water, clawing at them with dead, cold hands. Harry fought desperately, sending bursts of fire to drive them back, but they were relentless. Suddenly, a blaze of fire erupted, casting a brilliant light across the cavern. Dumbledore, though frail and shaking, had conjured a ring of flames that forced the inferi back into the black water. Harry clutched the locket and helped Dumbledore stagger out of the cave. When they finally returned to Hogwarts by apparition, the night was eerily quiet. The castle was bathed in moonlight, and Dumbledore leaned heavily on Harry. But their relief was short-lived. A sudden noise froze them in place. They were not alone. Draco Malfoy stood before them, wand shaking in his pale hand. "I have to do it," he whispered, tears brimming in his eyes. Harry's heart pounded. He wanted to reach out to Draco, to tell him he didn't have to, but he couldn't move. Dumbledore had silently immobilized him with magic. Then voices came from the shadows. Death Eaters poured into the tower, their wands drawn. And among them was Severus Snape. Harry's heart filled with dread as he watched the scene unfold, helpless. Dumbledore looked at Snape, his voice soft, almost pleading, "Severus, please," and then Snape raised his wand and spoke the words that shattered Harry's world. Avada Kedavra! A flash of green light illuminated the night, and Dumbledore fell silently from the tower, his body crumpling in the darkness below. Harry broke free of the spell holding him, screaming in rage and grief. He chased Snape through the grounds, firing curses wildly, but Snape blocked them all with effortless precision. "Fight back!" Harry roared, his voice hoarse. "No!" Snape shouted, his eyes blazing. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter! I am the Half-Blood Prince." Before Harry could react, Snape disapparated into the night, leaving Harry collapsed in the grass, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. The funeral was held days later. The entire school gathered by the Black Lake, the white tomb shining in the sunlight. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, sang a haunting song of loss, his lament echoing through the grounds. Harry stood with Ron and Hermione, the weight of the world heavier than ever. He knew now what he had to do. He would not return to Hogwarts next year. He would hunt down the remaining Horcruxes and finish what Dumbledore had started. As the crowd dispersed, Harry whispered to his friends, "I'm going to find them. All of them. It's the only way." And Ron and Hermione, without hesitation, said, "We're coming with you." Harry looked at them, gratitude and fear tangled in his chest. The path ahead was filled with danger, but for the first time, he felt ready. Because even though Dumbledore was gone, his mission lived on in Harry, and he would not rest until Voldemort was destroyed. The wizarding world was crumbling. Voldemort had seized control of the Ministry of Magic, spreading his influence like a disease. Families were torn apart, Muggle-born witches and wizards were hunted and imprisoned, and fear hung heavy in the air. Harry had turned 17, and with that, the magical protection his mother had given him was gone. He was now fully exposed. The night before he left the Dursleys forever was silent and tense. The Dursleys were forced to flee into hiding, and for the first time, Harry saw a flicker of fear in their eyes. As their car drove away, Harry stood in the empty doorway of number 4, Privet Drive, memories flooding back. This was where it had all started, and now it was ending. The Order of the Phoenix arrived to escort Harry to safety. To confuse Voldemort's spies, they used Polyjuice Potion, transforming 6 of Harry's friends into perfect copies of him. It was a dangerous plan. As they mounted broomsticks and thestrals into the night sky, Harry's heart pounded. The ambush came swiftly. Death Eaters appeared out of the darkness, their curses slicing through the air. The night was lit with flashes of green and red as spells collided. Harry clung desperately to Hagrid's motorbike, firing curses at their pursuers. But Voldemort himself appeared, his presence like a shadow falling across the stars. The chase was brutal. Hedwig, Harry's loyal owl, was struck by a killing curse, her small body falling lifelessly to the ground. A pain like fire seared through Harry's chest, but there was no time to grieve. A curse exploded near the bike, sending it spiraling. Harry barely managed to fight Voldemort off before Hagrid crash-landed them at the burrow. The survivors stumbled inside, shaken and bleeding. Some hadn't made it back. George Weasley had lost an ear to a Sectum Sempra curse, and the sight of his pale face stained with blood haunted Harry. The war had become real in a way he could no longer ignore. The burrow became a place of fragile safety, though Voldemort's shadow loomed even here. Bill and Fleur's wedding was beautiful, a rare spark of joy amid the darkness. Golden light filled the tent as music played and guests laughed softly. For a moment, Harry felt the weight lift. He saw the way Bill looked at Fleur, the way Ron and Hermione smiled at each other, and it filled him with a bittersweet longing. But the celebration ended in chaos. A silver patroness appeared, its voice cold and grim. "The Ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead, they are coming," the Death Eaters attacked. Spells tore through the air as guests screamed. Harry, Ron, and Hermione barely managed to escape, apparating blindly into the streets of London. The world had changed overnight. They were fugitives now, hunted by the Ministry and Voldemort's forces. There was no going back to Hogwarts, no sanctuary left. Harry knew they had to continue Dumbledore's mission: find and destroy the remaining Horcruxes. Their first stop was Grimmauld Place, the Black family home, now abandoned but still protected by powerful enchantments. Dust and shadows filled the house, Creature the house elf lurking in corners, bitter as ever. But Creature became unexpectedly helpful when Harry showed him kindness, revealing that one Horcrux the locket had been stolen by Mundungus Fletcher and ended up with Dolores Umbridge. The trio infiltrated the Ministry in disguise, sneaking through its gleaming corridors while fear gripped their hearts. They found Umbridge wearing the locket Horcrux like a trophy, her saccharine smile masking her cruelty as she interrogated Muggleborns. Harry stunned her, ripping the locket from her neck. But the victory was short-lived. Their cover was blown and the Ministry's oars swarmed. They barely escaped, apparating to the wilderness with no plan, no home, and no idea how to destroy the Horcrux. Life on the run was brutal. The locket's dark magic poisoned their thoughts, whispering lies, feeding their fears. It twisted their emotions until even Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned on each other. Ron, frustrated and bitter, finally left in a storm of anger, disapparating into the night. Harry was crushed. He sat by the dying fire, staring into the flames, wondering if he had failed everyone. But Hermione stayed, her quiet strength a lifeline. Together they searched for clues Dumbledore had left them, the mysterious symbol of the Deathly Hallows, the tale of the three brothers who had defied death itself. Their journey took them to Godric's Hollow, Harry's birthplace. The snow-covered village was silent, the church bells tolling softly in the distance. Harry stood before the ruins of his childhood home, tears blurring his vision. He visited the grave of his parents, tracing their names on the cold stone, and whispered, "I miss you." But even this moment of grief was interrupted by danger. Bathilda Bagshot, the historian they sought, was not who she seemed. She was a puppet for Voldemort's serpent, Nagini. The ambush was swift and deadly. Harry and Hermione barely escaped, apparating into the freezing wilderness. Hermione had saved Harry, but their escape came at a cost. Harry's wand was shattered. Days passed in a blur of cold and hunger. Harry wandered through the snowy forest, lost in despair, until he saw it, the Silver Doe Patronus. It led him to a frozen pool where the sword of Gryffindor lay gleaming beneath the ice. As Harry dove into the icy water, the locket tightened around his neck, choking him, pulling him under. Just as the darkness closed in, strong hands dragged him out. It was Ron. Ron had returned. He smashed the Horcrux with the sword, destroying it in a shower of smoke and screams. The relief was overwhelming. The trio was whole again. Together they visited Xenophilius Lovegood, hoping to learn more about the Deathly Hallows the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. Xenophilius explained the legend. His voice hushed with awe, but his desperation betrayed him. He had summoned the Death Eaters, hoping they would return his kidnapped daughter, Luna. The trio escaped once again, but the danger was closing in from all sides. One night they were captured by Snatcher's bounty hunters serving Voldemort. Dragged to Malfoy Manor, they were imprisoned in the dark cellar, their hearts pounding as Bellatrix Lestrange's shrill laughter echoed from above. Hermione was tortured for information, her screams tearing through Harry like knives. Dobby, the brave house elf, appeared in the nick of time, rescuing them with his magic. But Bellatrix threw her knife as they disapparated. Harry cradled Dobby's small body in his arms as the elf whispered his final words. Such a beautiful place to be with friends. Harry's tears fell freely as he dug the grave by hand, the night sky cold and starless above him. The war had already taken so much, and yet it felt like the worst was still to come. The night after Dobby's death was silent, the salty sea breeze carrying only the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. Harry stood by the fresh grave he had dug, his heart heavy and hollow. He whispered his thanks to Dobby, knowing the small elf's courage had saved them all. But there was no time to linger in grief. Voldemort was closer than ever, and the world was on the brink of destruction. From the safety of Shell Cottage, the trio began to piece together the next step. They knew they needed to find and destroy the remaining Horcruxes. Griphook, the goblin who had escaped Malfoy Manor with them, revealed a terrible truth. Another Horcrux lay hidden deep within the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. But the vault was guarded by layers of security, curses, and a dragon. Griphook agreed to help, but his price was the sword of Gryffindor. Harry felt torn, but he had no choice. He would deal with the consequences later. The break-in at Gringotts was chaos from the very start. Disguised with Polyjuice Potion, the trio infiltrated the marble halls of the Wizarding Bank. But Bellatrix's vault was protected by a deadly curse. Every object they touched multiplied and burned with fiery heat. As the piles of treasure rose higher and higher, Harry's heart pounded. He spotted the Horcrux Helga Hufflepuff's cup, but retrieving it meant the entire vault was collapsing. The trio barely escaped on the back of the dragon chained deep beneath the bank. The beast, scarred and beaten from years of captivity, soared into the open sky, its wings spread wide as it carried them away. For the first time in days, Harry felt the wind on his face, but he knew there was no time to celebrate. That night, Harry saw into Voldemort's mind again. The Dark Lord had discovered the theft and was furious. One by one, he checked the locations of his Horcruxes, his anger mounting as he realized they were being destroyed. Harry knew where Voldemort would go next. Hogwarts. The trio raced to the castle. When they arrived, they were ushered into the Room of Requirement by Neville Longbottom, who had been secretly leading Dumbledore's army all year. Hogwarts was no longer the safe, warm place Harry remembered. It was a fortress preparing for war. Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, and the surviving members of the Order of the Phoenix rallied to defend the school. McGonagall's voice was calm but unyielding as she enchanted the stone statues of the castle, commanding them to guard the grounds. Their heavy footsteps echoed like distant drums of war. Students were given a choice: fight or flee. Voldemort's voice boomed over the castle, cold and merciless. "I do not wish to spill magical blood," he lied. "Give me Harry Potter and you will be spared." No one moved. The battle began with a thunderous crash. Giants allied with Voldemort smashed through the gates while Death Eaters swept in, their curses lighting up the night sky. The castle shook as spells shattered walls and sent stones raining down. Inside, Harry's focus was on the Horcruxes. He learned from the Grey Lady, the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, that the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw was hidden in the Room of Requirement. The room transformed into a vast chamber filled with towering piles of forgotten objects. Harry, Ron, and Hermione searched frantically, but they were ambushed by Draco Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. Crabbe, desperate to impress Voldemort, unleashed Finfire, a cursed fire that consumed everything in its path. The flames roared to life, devouring mountains of junk and forming terrifying shapes of serpents and dragons. Harry grabbed the diadem just as the fire swallowed Crabbe, who was lost to his own spell. The trio escaped, coughing and singed, and the Horcrux was destroyed by the cursed fire's power. But there was no time to rest. Voldemort's forces were overwhelming. Fred Weasley was killed by an explosion, his lifeless body lying amid the rubble. Lupin and Tonks fought valiantly, but their faces would soon join the long list of the fallen. Harry's visions of Voldemort grew more frequent. He saw the Dark Lord in the Shrieking Shack, commanding Nagini to guard him. Harry, Ron, and Hermione crept toward the shack, but what they witnessed shattered Harry's heart. Voldemort ordered Nagini to kill Severus Snape. Harry burst into the shack too late. Snape lay dying, his black eyes locked onto Harry's. Blood pooled beneath him as he whispered, "Look at me." Harry did. And as Snape's life slipped away, memories poured from him in a silvery stream. Harry clutched the vial of memories, numb with shock. Back in the castle, Harry entered the pensive in Dumbledore's office. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Snape had loved Harry's mother, Lily, his entire life. Every sacrifice he had made was for her. And worse, Harry himself was a Horcrux. A piece of Voldemort's soul lived inside him, and the only way to destroy it was for Harry to die. He felt strangely calm as he walked through the battered, blood-stained castle, seeing the faces of his friends one last time. Ron and Hermione tried to stop him, but he couldn't tell them the truth. He stepped into the Forbidden Forest alone. Voldemort was waiting. Harry dropped his wand and whispered, "I'm ready." The green light of the killing curse engulfed him. But death was not the end. Harry awoke in a misty, ethereal version of King's Cross Station. Dumbledore was there, warm and kind, explaining that Harry had a choice. He could move on, or return to finish the fight. Harry chose to return. Back on the battlefield, Voldemort believed Harry was dead. He marched to the castle, flanked by his followers, dragging Harry's lifeless body like a trophy. Students and teachers stood in stunned silence. But then Neville Longbottom stepped forward. Defiant, he drew the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat and, in one swift motion, beheaded Nagini, the final Horcrux. Harry sprang to life. Gasps and screams erupted as he leapt from Voldemort's arms. Chaos exploded across the courtyard. The final duel began. Spells clashed in showers of light, the power of Voldemort's killing curse colliding with Harry's Expelliarmus. The Elder Wand, stolen from Dumbledore's tomb and wielded by Voldemort, recognized its true master, not Voldemort, but Harry. The curse rebounded. Voldemort fell, lifeless, the final echo of his scream fading into silence. The war was over, but the cost was heavy. Fred, Lupin, Tonks, Colin Creevey, and so many others lay dead. Harry walked among the bodies, his heart heavy with guilt and grief. He had won, but at a price that felt unbearable. In the great hall, survivors gathered in silence. The sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the battered castle. Harry stood with Ron and Hermione, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, and whispered, "It's over." He broke the Elder Wand in two and cast the pieces into the chasm below. He had no desire for its power. For the first time in his life, Harry felt free. The world was broken, but it could be rebuilt. And Harry knew that as long as he had Ron and Hermione by his side, he could face whatever came next.